Hey guys, strap in because we're about to blast through some crazy facts about Queen Cleopatra, that legendary queen who managed to outwit and outshine her way through an ancient world full of power plays, secret plots, and enough drama to make a modern soap opera look tame. Imagine ruling Egypt, speaking like 5 languages, and charming Julius Caesar, while also probably having a snake or 2 hidden up her sleeve. Yeah, it sounds like the plot of a Hollywood blockbuster. But nope, this is real history, complete with scandals, conspiracy theories, and a queen who knew how to keep everyone guessing. So before we get into the juicy bits, smash that like button if you love learning about powerful women, and drop a comment if you think you'd make a better ruler than Cleopatra. No judgment. Unless you'd lose your throne, of course. Now dim the lights, get comfy, and let's unravel some of the wildest facts from the life of Egypt's most famous and most mysterious queen. Along the gentle bend of the Nile, young Cleopatra VII studied her surroundings with a quiet intensity that only the tired river seemed to understand. Her eyes, bright and inquisitive, flickered over the bustling market stalls and silent statues, as if seeking clues not only about her kingdom, but about her own future. She was aware, even then, of the weight that would rest on her shoulders: an undisputed throne, a brother's envy, and the endless whisper of histories in different winds. The air around her was warm, carrying the scent of fresh bread and distant water, a subtle reminder of the mundane yet vital forces that shaped lives. In that slow, hazy moment, her mind wandered to plans and schemes, knowing her story would almost certainly be more complicated than anyone else's quiet expectations. As her rule took shape, the tentative tension in her court grew thicker. Alliances shifted like sand, fragile and constantly in motion. Cleopatra's cleverness became evident as she outmaneuvered her brother Ptolemy in a game of subtle power, the throne itself almost an afterthought to her strategic patience. Behind her calm exterior, she was quietly aware of the shadows cast by unspoken threats, her own ambitions wrapped in the hushed certainty that trust among rivals was an illusion even more fleeting than the Nile's changing currents. In the dim light of her chamber, her hand brushed over the carved wood of her scepter, a symbol as much of her resolve as of her solitude, and the unspoken paradox that leadership was often a lonely game of quiet victories. It was during these cautious days that Cleopatra's reputation for unorthodox cunning revealed itself in tiny but peculiar details. The merchants who had seen her moments alone whispered of strange perfumes made from crushed beetles and exotic spices that might have seemed insignificant, yet held secret power. Her confidant, a quiet scholar with a crew of mysterious origins, confided that these perfumes could be used to mesmerize and enchant, turning subtle scents into tools of influence. Such stories, half absorbed with a touch of irony and disbelief, lingered like the faint aroma of her secret mixtures, quietly permeating her court's undercurrent of tension. The irony that her most potent weapon might be a bottle of crushed insects, wrapped in ancient wisdom and daring ingenuity, was not lost on those who dared to listen. After many seasons of shifting alliances, her subtle tactics gradually shifted the tide, bringing moments of rare calm and stability. Cleopatra's gaze often drifted to the waters, where the Nile meandered peacefully, reflecting her own desire for a quiet steadiness. Her strategies, wrapped in the mundane acts of ruling, listening to reports, adjusting alliances, crafting delicate negotiations, moved forward at a pace that suited the slow, persistent river. Behind her hazy eyes, there was a quiet acknowledgement that her strength lay not in flash, but in patience, the kind that leaves small ripples rather than waves. Sometimes she paused in the garden, feeling the steady heartbeat of her people, and wondered if her quiet resolve was enough to keep the fragile peace she so carefully cultivated. In the end, Cleopatra's story hums softly like the perpetual waters of the Nile, an ongoing flow of human imperfection, ambition, and mundane truths. Her life, filled with quiet victories and subtle ironies, reminds us that even the most dazzling figures are just humans navigating the slow currents of time. Underneath the layers of royal facade and exotic perfumes, she was simply a person trying to reconcile the weight of her dreams with the slow, inevitable march of history. As her face faded into shadow, where time itself blurred her features, one could almost feel the gentle hum of the world, endlessly mundane, yet silently significant, persisting beyond the fleeting shimmer of power. In the tranquil halls of Cleopatra's court, the air was thick with anticipation, as the threat of the advancing Romans cast a slow, steady shadow over the ancient city. The queen, known for her sharp intellect, quietly studied her advisors, while her gaze lingered on her collection of delicate, exotic vials. It was an era where knowledge of poisons and antidotes was both a practical craft and a secret art, passed silently from hand to hand. At the edge of her mind, she acknowledged the odd comfort found in understanding her deadly tools, and perhaps in knowing that danger often lurked in mundane, everyday remedies. The slow passage of days was marked by the soft rustle of papyrus and the faint click of glass against wood, rhythms that steadied her resolve, even as her face remained calm and unreadable. As the Roman threat grew closer, tension seeped into the court like a faint but persistent ache. Cleopatra ordered her scholars to refine her knowledge of poisons, testing their potency on animals and executions with a quiet seriousness that did not disguise a hint of irony. One day, she casually observed a small, captive sparrow as it fluttered nervously in a gilded cage, its tiny body trembling in the muted light. With deliberate precision, she prepared a venomous cobra's extract, examining it as if it were merely a curious potion. Her subjects watched in awe and quiet fear, knowing that her reputation for deadly experiments was both a shield and a shadow hovering over their heads. Yet, amid the tension, her calm voice and measured movements underscored her mastery over her deadly craft. Later, Cleopatra's experiments took on a strangely humorous tone. She reportedly tested a ritual that involved surviving a snake bite by drinking honey and wine. It was a strange comfort and a strange fear, wrapped in the slow, almost casual act of mixing a sweet, warm drink. Her court listened, some fascinated, others quietly skeptical. The irony lay in the fact that this seemingly foolish remedy was known to work, at least, according to her notes, against certain snake venoms, while simultaneously illustrating her peculiar talent for blending life's small absurdities with deadly seriousness. As she sipped her concoction, her face remained expressionless, a calm harbor amid the storm of impending invasion. The court learned quietly that sometimes the greatest power was wielded in the simplest acts, or perhaps in the smallest acts of trust in the bazaar. In the steady, quiet corner of her chamber, Cleopatra reflected on her strange reputation, both feared and amused by her own deadly, almost mundane knowledge. The faint glow of oil lamps cast gentle shadows on the walls, highlighting the soft lines of her face as she considered her next move. Her mind drifted over the strange rituals and deadly experiments, those quiet acts of defiance woven into her daily routine. The irony was tender, yet it provided her a strange comfort. In a world brimming with chaos and war, she found solace in the slow, measured crafting of poisons and antidotes. Here, amidst the quiet hum of the city and the distant footsteps of her servants, there was a profound sense that even in danger, life could be quietly and calmly endured. Her face remained obscured, painted in shadows, as if she were a figure from a half-remembered dream. Eventually, Cleopatra regarded her quiet collection of knowledge as a testament to her human imperfection, remarkably. A mix of curiosity, fear, and humor. Her mastery over deadly concoctions did not make her invincible, but it kept her curiosity alive and her senses sharp. The irony of her existence, she thought, was that in mastering death, she had learned to accept life's slow, subtle rhythms how small acts could carry great weight, how truth, often hidden in plain sight, could be both a shield and a burden. She knew that her legacy would be shaped by these quiet, strange acts, those tiny threads in the tapestry of her life that some might call foolish, others profound. With a quiet sigh, she gazed out over the still city, contemplating that perhaps time, like her poisons, was something to be subtly understood, slowly appreciated, and gently exhausted. In the quiet corners of her grand chamber, Cleopatra sat among her scrolls and silken cushions, her gaze drifting over the bustling Nile outside her window. It was a moment of calm before the negotiations with Julius Caesar, a rare pause where even the queen's sharp mind could rest. Her fingers brushed softly over a small, translucent scroll made from papyrus that shimmered subtly in the evening light. Its surface brushed with crushed lapis lazuli that cast a faint blue glow. This secret library, filled with such peculiar texts, hinted at her love for hidden knowledge, an echo of her mystique and her desire to keep her secrets safe. As she prepared her words for the coming talks, a gentle sense of weariness settled over her, reminding her how mundane and yet profoundly human her life was, even at its most extraordinary. When the envoys entered her chamber, their eyes widened as Cleopatra carefully revealed her treasure, a series of scrolls with translucent, lapis-colored papyrus that felt cool and delicate in their hands. The Roman diplomats whispered among themselves, some amused, others puzzled, as she explained that these scrolls contained her personal writings, some even written in hieroglyphs that glowed faintly under the flickering torches. Amid their curiosity, she casually claimed to have penned a love poem that could only be read under moonlight, her voice steady, but her eyes glinting with playful irony. The moment was oddly tense, a fragile dance of diplomacy and intrigue. Yet beneath their formal smiles lay a strange sense of distance, humans trying to grasp the ephemeral magic she claimed to hold. All the while, her calm exterior hinted at a quiet pride in her artistic flair, undeterred by their confusions or questions. As the meetings stretched on, Cleopatra's notice was caught by a small, almost accidental detail. The way her words seemed to drift between sincerity and subtle humor, a gentle irony that softened the sharp edges of foreign politics. She watched as her envoys examined her translucent scrolls, the blue glow of the lapis reacting lazily to their flickering shadows. She knew well enough that her secret library was more than wealth or knowledge. It was her way of weaving her own mystique, a small act of rebellion against the chaos of empire. Her tales of moonlit poetry, simple yet layered with meaning, carried a tenderness that made her seem both distant and deeply human. she felt the quiet humor in her own cleverness, a fleeting smile passing over her face like the soft breeze through her chamber's carved wooden screens, as if the world itself was too tired to fully understand her peculiar, beautiful illusions. Later, as the envoys departed with their unusual scrolls tucked under their arms, Cleopatra leaned back against her cushion, the weight of her secret library settling comfortably around her. The night air crept in softly through the open window, carrying the sounds of the Nile and distant croaks of frogs, familiar, humble, utterly human. She traced her finger over a piece of papyrus, feeling the cool touch of the crushed lapis lazuli that had made it so unique. Her moonlit poem, long kept hidden in shadows, remained unspoken, its meaning more private than any crown or throne. The quiet dignity of her life, marred only slightly by the irony of her secret passions, settled like dust in her quiet chamber, an ordinary moment of peace in a world that often demanded extraordinary deeds. Perhaps, she mused, even queens might find solace in simple mysteries, or in the quiet glow of blue stone on fragile paper. In the stillness of the night, Cleopatra reflected on her unusual collection of secrets, her glowing scrolls, her moonlit poetry, her arts concealed beneath layers of diplomacy. She saw herself not as a mythic woman of power, but as someone devoted to small, tender acts of creativity that kept her human amidst the grand absurdity of empire. Her story, like many others compressed into the quiet hours, was a reminder that even the most extraordinary figures are, in the end, rather ordinary, imperfect, quietly curious, and trying to make sense of the fleeting magic they can hold in their hands. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the gentle lapping of the Nile, the whisper of her secrets resting softly in the darkness. The world moved slowly, as if exhausted by its own chaos, and Cleopatra, in her calm, tired wisdom, simply let it all drift past, content in the subtle wonder of her private world. In the quiet corridors of history, Cleopatra's ambitions often unfolded like a slow, deliberate dance. With a calm resolve, she commissioned the construction of a unique vessel, its hull shimmering with gold, its oars set with vibrant emeralds, an invitation to the senses amid the Nile's gentle whisper. The boat's design was modest, yet deliberate, seemingly almost unnoticeable to the sun's bright glare, as if Cleopatra wished to slip through the daylight unseen. It was a project born of a quiet hope, an object both practical and symbolic, crafted with patience and careful hands. The world outside moved in its usual sluggish rhythm, unaware that beneath the surface, a story of secrecy was quietly taking shape. One night, under a sky blanketed by faint stars, Cleopatra's gestures suggested a subtle confidence that bordered on the theatrical. She led her crew onto the golden vessel, her face shadowed yet calm, as if everything was unfolding exactly as it was meant to. During that voyage, she revealed the most unusual fact: her knack for dissolving a pearl in vinegar, turning it into coin to secretly fund her fleet. The words were delivered in a soft tone, as if sharing a secret with a close confidant. But the undercurrent of her confidence sparked a ripple of tension among her Roman visitors. The revelation hung in the air, neither wholly comic nor wholly alarming, just quietly provocative enough to unsettle the whispers of power that surrounded her. As the story spread, some figures among the Roman generals snorted softly at the idea. An ancient queen turning a single pearl into a covert treasure. The irony was unavoidable. A delicate gemstone turned into money with a simple trick, almost mundane in its foolishness, yet cunning in its subtlety. Cleopatra, listening silently to their dismissive remarks, allowed herself a faint smile, an acknowledgement of her quiet defiance. The image of the pearl dissolving in vinegar, slow and almost mundane in the telling, contrasted softly with the sharp, impatient movements of her adversaries. It was, perhaps, the only quiet victory she needed, a reminder that even in resistance, human ingenuity tends to be simple and human, rather than grand and perfect. In the stillness that followed, Cleopatra returned to her court with her usual calm. The gold boat now sitting quietly on the Nile's edge, reflecting the muted evening light. She seemed at peace, her expression unchanging, but her mind quietly alive, weighing the ironies of her own cleverness. The story of the pearl and vinegar became just another quiet episode in the slow passage of her time, an event that subtly redefined her legend without a splash or a fury. Her face remained shadowed, forever partially hidden, as if the true story was never meant to be fully known. The world outside continued its slow drift, raindrops on papyrus. The soft sounds of daily life, nothing much changed. Only the faint memory of a secret kept safely within her unseen, quiet mind. Looking back, one might see Cleopatra's story as a testament to patience and subtlety. How human stories often blend pragmatism with a touch of irony. Her ability to craft a vessel that could vanish into the sunlight, and her curious trick with pearls, reflect the quiet absurdity woven into human ambition. It reminds us that even at the height of power, life remains small, touchable, imperfect, just like dissolving a pearl in vinegar or building a gold boat at midnight. Her legend, tinged with soft humor and gentle defiance, exists quietly in the background of history's long, slow procession. Perhaps, in the end, We are all just ships passing through, carrying secrets that only the slow, tired currents will ever understand. In the quiet shadows of history, Cleopatra VII reigned as a figure both commanding and deeply human, her story unfolding like a slow, murmured song along the banks of the Nile. After a series of decisive battles that reshaped alliances and shifted fortunes, she withdrew into her hidden chambers, where the air was thick with the scent of incense and old parchment. There she took to recording her most extraordinary deeds, careful not to let her reflections fade into the silent dust of time, using papyrus infused with a curious mixture of cat oil ink, perhaps for durability, or simply a touch of whimsy. It was a quiet act, almost mundane, yet insistently deliberate, preserving her legacy in the soft layers of her scribble and ink. In these moments, the queen seemed to accept the slow inevitability of fading, contemplating her distant future even as her story began to echo through the corridors of eternity. As days drifted on, the tension built around her retreat, whispers in the shadowed courts hinting at her next move, or at her silent, unseen departure from the mortal realm. Perhaps she pondered her fate beneath the flickering light of oil lamps, the subtle sound of parchment turning, the faint breath of her scribbling hand. Visions of her mystifying deeds lingered, her alliances, her cunning, her whispered promises to her people. And yet, amidst it all, there was an undeniable sense of calm. Her methods, quirky and peculiar, had woven a tapestry of stories that even her enemies could not entirely unravel. Ironically, her act of chronicling these facts, so ordinary at its core, became an act of defiance against the relentless march of time, and a testament to her desire to be remembered, even if she disappeared into the shadows forever. In the quiet hours of night, perhaps, the irony of her situation became clear. Queen Cleopatra, famed for her dramatic confrontations and battles, found her greatest act of defiance in quiet documentation, inked on fragile papyrus that might someday fray, but never quite disappear. The act was simple, committing her extraordinary moments into a medium susceptible to the smallest fault. Yet it was profound in its resolve. She knew that history often remembers the loud and the bold, yet she preferred the slow, deliberate act of writing her truths, knowing that perhaps her facts would outlive even the stories themselves. The blurred faces of prophets and her ancestors may have watched from the shadows, but her own face, unfinished, human, and quietly amused, remained immortalized in her modest records. Her story, cloaked in irony and patience, became both her legacy and her subtle jest against the passing of time. In the soft stillness that followed, Cleopatra's presence seemed to dissolve into the gentle cadence of ordinary days, her chambers silent, her ink dry, her deeds stored away like forgotten treasures. The mysterious way she vanished, whether by the venom of an asp or by her own choosing, left historians with more questions than answers. Wrapped in the simplest of mysteries, perhaps in her final act, she slipped away on a quiet wind, leaving behind only whispers and worn papyrus. The ink faded, but the facts stubbornly enduring. Her legacy, shaped by human imperfection and subtle irony, persisted like the gentle flow of the Nile, steady, timeless, quietly amused by the absurdities of human ambition. In her absence, the world continued its slow turning, forever uncertain whether she had truly perished or simply escaped, cloaked in her own enduring stories. Now, in the calm reflection of history's endless river, Cleopatra remains a figure who gifts us the slow beauty of stories woven through time, her facts as timeless as her famous Nile. Whether she disappeared into the shadows or slipped silently into legend, her recorded deeds serve as a gentle reminder of human frailty and the quiet resilience of memory. Her ink-stained pages, gently curled and worn, speak softly of a queen who understood that true power did not lie in violence alone, but in the careful crafting of one's own enduring story. Even in her mysterious absence, she continues to inspire those who take a moment to look closer, listening in the silence for the quiet echo of her story, still gently lingering beyond the reach of history's rush. In the quiet mornings of Alexandria, Cleopatra's early steps around the marble corridors felt neither hurried nor altogether purposeful. Her young hands brushed over the cool stone surfaces as the city outside buzzed softly with merchants and distant ships, while within the air was thick with the scent of incense and anticipation. Ascending the throne beside her brother Ptolemy, she bore the weight of tradition with a quiet resilience, her eyes flickering with the faint excitement of newfound power. There was a certain routine in the carefully repeated formalities, diplomatic greetings, scribes' pens scratching. Yet beneath it all, Cleopatra lingered on a different thought, one that flickered like a fragile candle in the shadows of her mind. As days stretched into nights, the corridors whispered with political schemes and subtle betrayals, each conversation cloaked in deliberate calm. Cleopatra's awareness of her role grew heavier, a slow pressure around her chest, punctuated only by the soft sounds of the court's daily routines. Silken robes brushing against stone floors, quiet murmurs of courtiers exchanging cautious glances amidst the landscape of loyalties and rivalries. A chance encounter with Amun, an Egyptian priest whose face was forever hidden by the shadows of a veil, stirred a quiet curiosity within her. This meeting was unremarkable by form, but profound in feeling. An unspoken question that lingered as the priest's light, shadowed face, was quickly concealed by the flickering candlelight, leaving Cleopatra pondering what might lie beneath the surface. In the days that followed, Cleopatra found herself slipping into small moments of secret refuge, glances exchanged in shadowed chambers, carefully crafted notes passed under hurried breath, each carrying the weight of a forbidden longing. She chuckled quietly at her own foolishness, aware of the irony that her pursuits of love had become intricate threads woven into her royal tapestry. Meanwhile, her brother Ptolemy remained unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath his sister's composed exterior. His own ambitions more focused on consolidating power than on the delicate emotions that tugged at Cleopatra's heart. The court's debates echoed around her, but her mind wandered instead to the mysterious priest, whose blurred eyes and hidden face made her feel both protected and exposed at the same time. Eventually, the routine settled into a gentle rhythm, days marked by careful diplomacy, nights of hushed meetings in shadowed alcoves, an unspoken agreement to keep her secret affair just beneath the surface of her stately life. Cleopatra learned to contain her feelings, folding away her curiosity like a fragile piece of papyrus. The warmth she felt when near Amun was a quiet comfort amid the cool glare of royal duties. The city outside buzzed on, indifferent to her hidden desires, much like the steady hum of the Nile in the dusk. She observed the ordinary actions of her court, servants removing trays, courtiers exchanging pleasantries, each small motion a reminder of the mundane reality that contrasted sharply with the tumult within her. In this calm, she began to accept her pursuit of love as a quiet, human right amid her gilded, burdened life. Now, as she looked out from the high balcony over the shimmering waters of Alexandria, Cleopatra's thoughts drifted gently toward the inevitable, yet somehow inevitable for everyone. A slow acceptance of the quiet absurdity of human longing. Her face, slightly blurred by the warm, fading light, carried no regret, only a soft, knowing smile at the timeless dance of power and passion. The city below moved slowly, as if in sleep, echoing her own tranquil resignation to the subtle intertwining of duty and desire. She understood that her secret love, fragile and fleeting, was just another thread in her life's intricate fabric, an ordinary human story woven with quiet irony, quietly enduring beyond the shimmer of crowns and monuments. Under the gentle glow of the moon, Cleopatra and Amun found quiet refuge beneath the leaning palms along the riverbank. Their meetings were slow, almost tentative, fingers brushing, whispered verses, exchanged between sips of wine and the soft rustling of leaves. The Nile murmured softly in the background, oblivious to the secret, yet persistent in its silent witness. Cleopatra's gaze occasionally strayed to her courtiers' distant figures, hidden by shadows, while her heart flickered with a cautious warmth. It was a beginning wrapped in the mundane eternity of night, where human longing and duty quietly intertwined. As days unfolded, the clandestine affair wove itself into a fragile tension, each encounter growing slightly more deliberate, the secret more burdensome. Courtiers' whispers slithered through the court like unseen snakes. Conspiracies seemed to bloom from every corner, fueled by the queen's distant glances and clandestine conversations. Cleopatra, ever the calculating ruler, masked her fluctuating emotions behind a veneer of calm. Her hands steady even as her heart fluttered in defiant beats. Amun's secret visits became ritualized, an exchange of verses, a shared silence, a fleeting touch marked by the persistent fear of discovery. The irony was palpable. They sought intimacy in the shadows of a kingdom, obsessed with appearances. Irony dripped from the scene like honey. Here were two people craving simple connection amid a backdrop of mortal suspicions and royal pretenses. Cleopatra, the sovereign mistress of deception, inwardly chuckled at the theater she played, her polished facade never cracking. The courtiers, meanwhile, whispered eagerly about alliances and betrayals, never suspecting the quiet fire smoldering behind her composed face. Amun, often bemused, seemed to understand that their secret was a delicate, absurd game, one that relied on patience, concealment, and the slow art of waiting. Behind her regal veneer, Cleopatra wondered inwardly, how long could they hold on to their small, imperfect rebellion? Meanwhile, the Nile flowed on, indifferent and unbothered. Eventually, the clandestine meetings settled into a gentle rhythm, almost peaceful, an unspoken truce between the harsh demands of sovereignty and the fragile human need for tenderness. Cleopatra's expression softened in stolen moments, a faint smile passing over her face as Amun's hand brushed her arm briefly, unnoticed by the world. She found solace in these quiet exchanges, a respite from the endless game of diplomacy and strategy. Amun's face, partially shaded by the low sun, looked as tired and amused as one might expect, his eyes echoing both affection and gentle irony. In these shared lullabies of stolen moments, the queen glimpsed a fleeting peace, a reminder that beneath the veneer of power, even rulers are human. The Nile continued its slow, eternal course calm, tired, and utterly unaffected. Looking back, Cleopatra's secret love affair seemed like a rare, quiet wink at the chaos of her life, a subtle, human thread woven into the fabric of her rule. The palms, the river, the whispered verses, they all faded into soft, distant echoes, a gentle reminder of her fleeting vulnerability. The irony of it all lay in how ordinary it felt. Love in shadows, in stolen time, was hardly extraordinary. It was merely human. As she sat quietly overlooking the river one evening, her mind drifted to those moments, simple yet profound. Perhaps, she thought, that was all anyone truly desires. A brief moment of authenticity amid the endless march of duty. The Nile continued its slow journey, disinterested and eternal, unchanged by human longing and fleeting passions. In the quiet chambers of the palace, Cleopatra's gaze lingered softly on the far wall as Julius Caesar's arrival was announced with a measured knock. The air was thick with the scent of frankincense and stale oil lamps, casting a gentle glow on her thoughtful face. She knew the day's purpose was clear, an alliance that might cement her throne. But beneath her calm exterior, an ember of private longing flickered. The world outside seemed distant, muted, as she listened to the step of Roman sandals echo down the corridor, methodical and unhurried. It was an ordinary, yet significant moment, an intersection of destiny and desire, wrapped in a calm that felt as fragile as the flicker of a candle flame. As Caesar's visit unfolded over days, the tension in the court grew subtly thicker, like a slow drip of honey, stickily inevitable. Cleopatra found herself slipping into whispered exchanges and fleeting glances with Amun, her secret confidant, whose smile was both a comfort and a risk. Rumors stirred like restless flies just beyond the marble thresholds, unnoticed by most, but felt keenly by a jealous eunuch who watched from shadows. One evening, the eunuch's sharp eyes caught a glimpse, a faint flicker of Amun's robes through a doorway, flashing like a secret light in the dim corridor. With cautious steps, he began to plot a quiet game of detection, knowing that exposure could undo everything they risked for love in shadows. Ironically, in the quiet chaos of palace intrigue, the humans involved maintained a deadpan patience that seemed almost comical. Cleopatra, with her jeweled fingers tapping lightly on a scroll, watched her secret slip away like grains of sand, unwittingly revealing more than she intended. Amun's face, usually so composed, registered a flicker of worry, though his expression was as bland as the papyrus documents stacked nearby. The eunuch's cloak of suspicion grew heavier with each passing day, a slow unraveling that no one truly wanted, but all expected. Yet somehow, amid the foiled plans and whispered fears, life in the palace went on, small daily routines playing out as if nothing of great consequence was happening. Eventually, There was a calmness, like the settling of dust after a storm, that descended upon the palace corridors, as if time itself had decided to pause briefly in the wake of human folly. Cleopatra's eyes, often reflecting Nile depths, now seemed to hold a quiet resignation, accepting the gentle, uncertain peace that came after long tension. Amun, having narrowly escaped discovery, regained his composure, blending once more into the background like a forgotten sculpture. The eunuch, observing in silence, perhaps wondered if his vigilance was worth the weight of petty jealousies, or if history would now drift on, indifferent to the small human dramas enacted within these stone walls. In this stillness, a soft understanding emerged. Perhaps love, even in secret, was just another quiet human act, fragile, mundane, and ultimately ephemeral. Looking back, Cleopatra's story unfolds as a gentle reminder of how ordinary encounters shape grand histories, yet at their core remain profoundly human and quietly insignificant. The shadows and whispers eventually faded like the setting sun, leaving only faint traces behind. Her fleeting love affair with Amun, like many others, was neither myth nor forgotten legend, but a simple human moment, timid and ordinary beneath the weight of empires. The palace, now resting in calm, held no memories sharper than the warm glow of a lamp or the softness of a worn cloth. And somewhere within, perhaps, a sense of gentle humor lingered, reminding us that even the most profound passions are, at heart, nothing more than small, human stories slipping quietly into the past. On a quiet night in Alexandria, beneath a sky streaked with faint stars, Cleopatra sat in her chamber, contemplating the quiet rhythm of her daily life. A faint scent of incense hovered in the air, and the soft rustle of silk drapes was the only sound. The queen's gaze was distant, aware of the small, almost invisible tremor of uncertainty that sometimes crept into her thoughts. Around her, the city was peacefully still, yet behind her lips lingered the weight of myriad choices, none loud, but all heavy enough to linger. It was a time of calm, or so it seemed, before the faint ripple of potential treachery stirred in the shadows. As days passed, whispers grew in the palace corridors, little cautious confidences exchanged in half-lit spaces. Cleopatra sensed the subtle shifting of alliances, even within her trusted circle. A eunuch, once loyal, now moved strangely. His eyes flickered too long over certain scrolls, his silence layered with unspoken concerns. It was as if an unseen hand had nudged him toward betrayal, or perhaps only slipped him into the cracks of her fragile security. The tension accumulated in quiet moments, and even her most composed advisors felt the chill of impending trouble. The betrayal was not loud, but it was undeniably present, rippling through the fabric of her carefully woven palace. One evening, irony settled like dust on old wooden furniture. News arrived that threatened to unravel everything. A plot to expose her affair, orchestrated by the very man she once trusted. The eunuch's betrayal cut deeper, exposing her vulnerabilities with a soft, relentless precision. The scandal risked her alliance with Caesar and forced her into a cruel choice: sacrifice Ammon, her closest confidant, or gamble everything for her relationship with Rome. Cleopatra's face remained composed, yet her mind moved with slow, deliberate calculation, weighing small, unseen consequences. The absurdity of her predicament was in its quiet ordinariness, an age-old dance of loyalty, secrets, and silent compromises. Later that night, in the gentle darkness, Cleopatra faced her enemies in a carefully orchestrated confrontation. Candles flickered in the cool air as she outwitted her betrayers, using subtle gestures and words that masked her true intent. Her fingers brushed the soft silk of her gown, and her voice, steady and calm, offered no clues of her inner resolve. With delicate precision, she sealed her pact with Caesar, an act both political and personal, protecting Ammon and her own reign, yet binding her further into a web of history's slow, endless turning. Outside, the city's quiet murmuring persisted, unaware of the quiet heroism that unfolded in a single decisive moment. It was neither victorious nor tragic, simply another quiet act in the ongoing human story. As dawn stretched its pale fingers across the horizon, Cleopatra reflected in stillness, sensing how small human actions ripple into the vast, slow tide of history. Her choices, subtle and deliberate, knit her fate tighter to the course of empire, not with grand gestures, but with measured steps and quiet wit. She understood that her story, like all stories of power, was made up of countless small sacrifices and ironies, often unnoticed by the world. The palace remained silent, save for the gentle hum of life going on, unchanged, yet forever altered. Perhaps, in the end, that was the true secret of leadership: understanding the calm, unnoticed moments that shape everything. In the stillness that followed Caesar's sudden departure, Cleopatra found herself retreating to the gentle embrace of the Nile's quiet banks, where the water's soft murmur seemed to echo her own unspoken hopes. With a measured breath, she lingered in the shadows of her palace, contemplating the fragile threads of political power she wielded, and the humble, persistent love she kept hidden. It was a time when even the most commanding figures could find solace in mundane moments, stirring a cup of wine, or tracing the patterns in the sand, reminding her that life's small routines persisted beyond chaos. Her thoughts often drifted to Amun, whose unseen presence was as constant as the river's flow, yet as elusive as a fleeting shadow. Despite the waning certainty of her throne, her heart quietly clung to that secret bond, an understated reminder of her humanity amid empire's shadows as political tensions simmered and rival factions eyed her reign. Cleopatra's retreat to the Nile became tinged with a quiet dread, though she maintained her customary calm. The whispers of betrayal and shifting loyalties swirled like the evening breeze. Yet she moved through her days with careful grace, diplomatic words exchanged over humble dinner tables, a fleeting glance exchanged in the shadows of her chamber. Her love for Amun persisted, concealed behind a veil of subtlety, though the world seemed increasingly unable to see the private world she cherished. It was in these muted exchanges, the soft sounds of footsteps and the gentle rustle of fabric, that her true emotions lingered hidden, but undeniably present. Beneath her composed exterior, a flicker of irony flickered. The greatest secret she kept was also the one that tethered her to a simpler, quieter existence. In the quiet hours after nightfall, Cleopatra often wondered if her love for Amun was too fragile a thing to bear the weight of kingship, or simply another human folly in a world so often indifferent. The irony of her situation was that even in her most private moments, the shadow of her downfall seemed to linger, a faint, unseen presence. She would sit by the flickering lamps, running her fingers over the textured surface of a papyrus, as if keeping her thoughts tethered to some distant, simpler life. The blurred faces of prophets and gods, often unseen or obscured by light, paled beside the quiet clarity of her true devotion, silent, enduring, understated. Her love, like the Nile's flow, continued steadily, muted but persistent, an ordinary secret rooted deep within her familiar, well-worn heart. In the calm that followed the storm of political upheaval, Cleopatra found herself simply existing in the slow, deliberate rhythm of daily life, an unspoken harmony between duty and desire. She watched the sun dip low over the golden sands, light glinting softly on the surface of the river, every day blending into the next, each moment holding a quiet sense of acceptance. Her interactions, whether exchanging nods with courtiers or sharing quiet meals with her attendants, carried an unspoken understanding. Some truths are better kept in the shadows. The secret love she harbored with Amun had become a kind of silent anchor, grounding her amid the shifting tides of history. With calm, almost amused resignation, she acknowledged that her greatest act of rebellion was simply remaining true to her feelings in a world that often demanded concealment. As she looked back on her reign, Cleopatra understood that her secret love, though veiled in silence and shadow, had left an indelible mark, not on the records of kings and conquerors, but within her own quiet core. The Nile's gentle, persistent flow mirrored the steady beat of her heart, continued through years of turmoil and fleeting peace. Her life was a series of small, ordinary acts, smiling at her reflection, listening to the far-off sounds of the river, touching each moment with gentle resolve. In the slow, enduring silence, she recognized that history often forgets the quietest stories. Yet, some of the most meaningful ones are whisper quiet beneath the surface. There, in the understated depths of her love, she found her own form of eternity, a gentle, sleepy legacy that softly endured beyond the chaos. In the quiet chambers of Alexandria's grand palace, Cleopatra, veiled in a thin glow of evening light, begins her day much the same as others, adjusting her garments and exchanging measured glances with courtiers. Her reflection, faintly flickering in a polished bronze mirror, reveals a face that she carefully keeps luminous, touched by secret routines meant to impress. Today, she greets her advisors with a calm smile, her posture poised yet relaxed, hinting at her awareness of the delicate balance of power and charm. Behind her, the corridors hum softly with footsteps and muted voices, while the air is tinged with the scent of coriander and salt, reminders of the Nile's gentle influence. Her first secret, a nightly milk bath infused with honey and lotus petals, remains tucked away. A small ritual meant to maintain her glow for the diplomatic audiences that come and go, like shadows passing through her life. As the days unfold, the palace brims with political intrigue. Rivals whisper behind silk screens, and ambassadors press her for favors. Cleopatra's beauty routines, once simple notions of vanity, now take on a quiet urgency. Her skin must stay luminous enough to command respect without words. She dips her fingers into a chalice of fragrant milk, while servants prepare her bath with petal-laden waters, each step carefully performed. The irony is subtle. Her secret is just a mixture of ordinary ingredients, yet it carries the weight of her image, a delicate armor in a world of shifting alliances. The blurred faces of prophets and seers flicker in her memory, their images obscured by light and shadow, whispering predictions that she both ignores and heeds. Still, beneath her polished exterior, a calm acceptance settles, like a river at dusk, gliding smoothly over unseen currents. There's a quiet humor in the persistence of her beauty rituals, especially as her courtiers sometimes joke about the luxury of honey baths and lotus petals. Cleopatra, ever composed, responds with a faint smile, knowing well that such routines are simple but meaningful acts of control, a small daily defiance against time's indifferent march. Their chatter drifts around her like a gentle breeze, barely disturbing her focus as she considers the next diplomatic banquet or strategy. Real life intrudes, even here a small chipped piece of pottery, a servant's yawn, a flicker of sunlight across polished marble, reminding her of human imperfection amid grandeur. Her routine, like her rule, hinges on subtlety and patience, a quiet acknowledgement that even queens are not immune to the ordinary routines that buoy their image and their humanity. In moments of quiet reflection, Cleopatra often considers her routines as part of an overall calm, a daily rhythm that grounds her amidst the chaos of her court. The milk bath, once a secret ritual, now feels like a familiar thread woven into the fabric of her life, an ordinary act that carries extraordinary meaning. She watches the lotus petals float softly on the water's surface, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, the sensation gentle and unremarkable, yet quietly soothing. The blurred faces of her advisors and foreign envoys fade into the background as she allows herself this small peace, an interruption of the endless demands of power, spoken softly in the stillness of her chamber. Perhaps, she muses, beauty is less about perfection and more about patience, an ongoing, understated act of tending to oneself and one's presence in a world easily lost in noise. Eventually, Cleopatra's thoughts drift toward the quiet truth that her routines are as transient as the Nile's gentle flow, an everyday necessity cloaked in the allure of royalty. Her skin, glowing softly from her nightly bath, is a humble symbol of her effort to remain both captivating and human. The palace continues to hum in the background, servants sweeping, distant footsteps, the faint scent of jasmine, each moment quietly passing, much like her routine. Her face, partially illuminated and partially hidden by shadow, seems to accept the subtle irony that no routine can shield her entirely from the march of time or the way of history. With a slow, almost imperceptible breath, she embraces the calm, the gentle, unremarkable rhythm of ordinary moments beneath her crown, knowing they are the true foundation of her presence. In the waning light of ancient evenings, Cleopatra's personal curiosity was stirred by the faint, elusive sense of Egypt's distant lands. She summoned her scribes and scholars to her gilded chamber, where plans unfurled for a secret garden laboratory nestled behind stone walls and lush greenery. Inside, delicate vials and pestle stone mortars whispered of exotic origins, fragrances born from distant markets and hidden workshops. The queen watched with half-lidded eyes as aromatic oils and powders mingled into quiet ceremonies of discovery, each mixture a tiny act of patience and hope. It was all just another layer in her intricate beauty ritual, an ordinary pursuit cloaked in the whisper of kings and queens seeking something special, something that would linger beyond the desert's harsh sun. As the weeks passed, the routine settled into a slow, rhythmic process, shadowed by the faint hum of bees and the whisper of wind through palm fronds. Cleopatra's attendants prepared crimson powders from crushed beetle shells, their fingers dexterous, yet distracted by the subtle irony of using death's remnants to craft beauty. The fragrance of frankincense and myrrh filled the air, blending with the earthy touch of crushed shells, an unusual melody of scent and texture that seemed both mundane and mystical. With each application, the queen patiently spread her homemade rouge, unaware of the quiet contradictions woven into her daily life. A protective mask crafted from insects and resin, both fragile and resilient, much like her own reflections on authority and vulnerability. It was a small, familiar act that underlined her human, imperfect pursuit of beauty under the great, indifferent sun. One afternoon, a favorite attendant, half scowling at the effort, handed Cleopatra a small, ornate mirror, a gift with no ceremony, just a simple moment of shared silence. She examined her face, tracing the crimson mask carefully, as if seeking reassurance in its glazed, alien sheen. Outside, the echo of her court's gossip mingled with the distant cry of hawks. Yet here, in this quiet corner, the scene felt oddly irrefutable. Cleopatra's gaze, blurred by the light, was fixed on the mundane miracle of her own reflection. A woman enacting a ritual that was both careful and absurd. The irony was gentle. This sitting, this paint, this science, all small acts in the vast, unchanging desert of history, where even queens could only hope to slow the relentless march of time and dull the sharper edges of impermanence. In the calm that followed, the queen's routines became almost meditative, a quiet bridge between moments of power and the fleeting touch of daily life. She sat on a low dais, her hands resting on the soft linen, noticing the texture of the dried rouge, rough yet comforting beneath her fingertips. Her face, softly shadowed by the waning sun, bore the faint trace of her efforts, a testament to her patience and human fallibility. Around her, the garden labors continued quietly. Sculptors, perfumers, and scholars, all busy with their routines, each engaged in small acts that maintained the illusion of control. Here, amid the blend of scents and textures, she found a strange, fleeting peace, a quiet acknowledgement that beauty, like history, was always just a version of a passing moment, held gently in tired hands, reflecting on her centuries. One might see Cleopatra's unusual beauty ritual as a simple snapshot of a woman. Beneath the layers of rouge and scent, there was quiet humility, an acknowledgement that even the most powerful figures are bound to mortal routines and imperfection. Her laboratory, hidden behind walls of shadow and scent, remains a testament to human curiosity and its silent absurdity. A queen's attempt to hold back the desert's relentless sun with pots of crushed beetle shells and fragrant resins. It's a familiar story. Really, each of us seeks some kind of shelter, some fleeting shield against the dull passage of days. And in quiet moments, perhaps, even the most luminous faces are just tired travelers resting for a breath in the vast, timeless silence. In the quiet hours of a late afternoon, Cleopatra sat before her mirror, the faint glow of oil lamps flickering across her face. Her reflection was half-shadowed, her expression calm and contemplative, as she prepared for a delicate political assembly inspired by stories of rare beauty and divine favor. She had recently begun experimenting with an unusual ointment, crushed emeralds mixed with Nile silt, that she hoped would lend her a luminous radiance. The words and voices from the palace halls floated in the background, hushed and distant, like a gentle current of human endeavor. It was an ordinary moment of quiet preparation. Yet for Cleopatra, it felt quietly significant, an act of hope, or perhaps defiance, amid the slow march of courtly life. As the meeting drew near, tension crept into the palace chambers, an underlying uneasy hum that matched the slow drip of water from a fountain outside. Her trusted advisors hesitated, exchanging concerned glances about her new ritual, whispering worries on the edge of spoken words. Cleopatra's own hand trembled slightly as she smoothed the ointment across her cheek, feeling the cool, gritty texture settle on her skin. In the shadowed corners, some courtiers questioned the wisdom of alchemy. Would a shimmer of crushed stones really hold her power? Or was it just foolish vanity? Still, she looked into her mirror, her face a carefully composed mask of calm patience. There was an unspoken understanding that this ritual, strange as it was her subtle act of resilience, quietly asserting her control over her destiny, even if her peers thought her foolhardy. Later, as Cleopatra stepped into the assembled hall, her reflection seemed almost surreal, her skin faintly gleaming, tinged with greenish hues beneath the soft candlelight. A few courtiers couldn't hide their smirks, their faces blurring into shadows as the room paused. The contrast was irony itself. A queen adorns herself not just with jewels, but with crushed stones and Nile sludge. in an effort to shine brighter than political threats. She felt the weight of their silent judgment, like a faint pressure on her shoulders, but also the faint humor that life could be so quietly absurd. Her hand lingered near her jaw, a small gesture of defiance. The moment was both poignant and quietly humorous, an intricate dance of human vanity and the desire to be seen as divine. Despite the mundane materials of her beauty regimen, in the calm that settled after her arrival, Cleopatra's gaze drifted over the assembly, her expression serene. The room's chatter slowed, becoming a low hum that blended with her own steady breathing. She recognized the small, ordinary act of applying her reflective ointment for what it truly was, an effort to find grace amid the chaos, a moment to feel composed when everything around her seemed uncertain. Her favorite mirror, slightly cracked at the edges, reflected not just her face, but the quiet dignity of a woman trying to maintain control over fleeting fame and fragile alliances. The alchemical concoction sat beneath her skin, no longer just vanity, but part of her subtle, ongoing dialogue with power. With slow, measured patience, she simply continued, quietly unbothered by the doubts of others, content in her ordinary act of quiet rebellion. As night fell over the palace, Cleopatra sat quietly in her chamber, her reflection now softened by shadows and the dim glow of lamps. Her fingers traced the edge of her mirror, her mind lingering on the strange mixture that had momentarily linked her to a legend of divine beauty. The crushed emeralds and Nile silt, once an act of hope or defiance, had dissolved into the quiet acceptance of her own imperfection. An unremarkable, yet deeply human moment. She gazed into the mirror, contemplating the subtle irony that beauty could be both an art and an illusion, crafted with modest materials and quiet patience. In the stillness, she appreciated the slow rhythm of her own life, the small routines that made her both ordinary and extraordinary, and in that calm, she found a gentle, enduring truth, that mortal beauty, no matter how gilded or mudded, was simply part of the silent, ongoing story of human imperfection. As the sun dipped lower over the Nile, Cleopatra quietly prepared her evening ritual, its purpose both practical and peculiar. She gathered fragrant papyrus leaves, their edges curling soft and brown, and fermented dates that had sat in earthen jars for weeks, their sweet aroma blending slowly with the cool evening air. The routine was mundane, a personal pause amid palace duties, yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken hope for renewal, a meditation on beauty, strength, and perhaps even prophecy. Her attendants, busy with their small chores, scarcely noticed the flicker of concentration in her eyes as she arranged her modest tools on a low wooden table. The quiet was thick with the knowledge that this was a ritual only she understood, one that blurred the line between vanity and something more transcendental, even if no prophet's face remained visible behind veiled light. On this particular night, the sky darkened unexpectedly, and word spread of an approaching lunar eclipse, a rare event that seemed almost scripted for her most daring experiment. Cleopatra, undeterred, called her servants to prepare the steaming concoction, filling the air with thick wisps of papyrus smoke and the faint tang of fermented dates. As the moon's shadow began to crawl across the sky, she settled into her ritual space, breathing in the warm, scented steam, hoping it would sharpen her sight and grant her visions. Though her prophets' faces were always hidden, their words blurred by time and shadow. Outside, her enemies gathered in silence, their ears alert for signs or whispers that might shape history's next act. The queen's calm presence contrasted sharply with the tense, expectant atmosphere, her eyelids fluttering in the warm haze like the calm before a storm of silent confrontation. As the lunar eclipse reached its peak, the atmosphere grew thick with irony. Cleopatra's daring performance was, in a way, mundane, a smoky ritual amid grand court ambitions, conducted as the world outside blinked in the dark. Servants whispered among themselves about her strange method of spiritual clarity, perhaps amused by its apparent absurdity. Her enemies watched from a distance, their eyes half closed, unsure if she was seeking divine counsel or merely indulging in an eccentric beauty ritual. The fermented date steam curled upward lazily, carrying with it the faint scent of human folly, delicate, sweet, and just a little foolish. Cleopatra's face remained serene, her features softened by the gentle haze, her gaze fixed on something unseen, a faint ghost of a smile almost touching her lips. For all the drama, it was just another quiet night of human attempt, an imperfect bid for insight and connection, with no guarantees, only the slow whisper of time and patience. When the moon finally slipped away from its shadow, unveiling its brightness once more, Cleopatra emerged from her steaming cocoon of papyrus smoke, her face aglow with an ordinary radiance. The ritual had passed quietly, like many others, leaving behind a scent of fermented date and a faint, unshakable calm. Her enemies, now overshadowed by the returning light, could only observe her composed disappearance into the palace walls. She felt no more than a gentle reassurance, perhaps a fleeting moment of clarity in a life built on shadows and subtle illusions. The quiet success of the ritual was not marked by divine visions, but by the simple fact that she remained herself, unchanged, unshaken, still wrapped in the familiar fabric of her daily role. It was a modest reminder that even in pursuit of the extraordinary. Ordinary endurance, quietly endured. Later, as she reflected in the dim glow of the palace lanterns, Cleopatra considered her unusual regimen with quiet irony, the nightly dance of smoke and fermented fruit, her hopeful ploy for insight. These were quietly human acts, imperfect and fleeting. Her face, still blurred behind veiled memories of the prophets and gods, held no certainty, only the gentle acceptance of her own human limits. It was, after all, a long, slow journey to beauty, wisdom, and perhaps understanding, marked by small rituals, stubborn hopes, and the occasional amusing drama. In the end, her secret was not in the elaborate preparations, but in the subtle patience with which she endured her own human imperfection, quietly measuring time with another night's slow, soft breath. In the quiet folds of her palace chamber, Cleopatra sat before her small wooden table, her fingers gently resting on fragile papyrus scrolls. The air was still, tinged softly with the scent of fragrant oils and aged linen, as she carefully inscribed her thoughts on beauty, an act both routine and contemplative. With a calm, measured grace, she recorded her unconventional remedies: kohl mixed with honey, almond-based creams, and mysterious herbal infusions, hoping to preserve her secrets in a form that would outlast her reign. Outside, the shadows lengthened slowly, unhurried, as her attendants moved quietly through the background, unaware of her inward focus. Still, it was a moment of subtle effort, a queen's quiet desire to immortalize her personal routines amid the ebb and flow of history's tired tide. As the unrest in her kingdom waned, Cleopatra's attention turned inward. It was time to formalize what she had long practiced in secret. She summoned scribes and scholars, offering them her scrolls and receipts for her beauty potions, now carefully penned with a steady hand. Amongst the faint scribble and damp ink, there was a peculiar irony. A ruler renowned for her sharp wit and political cunning now meticulously documented her beauty rituals, methods often dismissed as mere vanity, yet integral to her identity. The chamber filled with soft sounds of quills, scratching paper, and hushed exchanges, the unspoken acknowledgement that even power could be intertwined with quiet self-care. Her face, often cloaked by veils and shadow, remained unseen but present, an image both fleeting and enduring. Years later, her formulas had spread beyond her court, copied onto brittle papyri that crinkled with age. Some scholars scoffed at the simplicity: milk, almond paste, and soot. Yet these humble ingredients persisted, woven into stories and legends. The irony lingered in the fact that such mundane substances could be wrapped in the aura of eternity, shaped by her name. Cleopatra's legacy was becoming a quiet myth, a queen who trusted in remedies as ordinary as everyday life, yet fashioned her identity around them. Meanwhile, her face remained obscured in shadow, a blurred silhouette behind the glow of her enduring name. The formulations, like her rule, were neither ostentatious nor grand, but they carried a subtle power, what humans often sought in small, silent acts. In the fullness of time, her beauty rituals settled into an unspoken calm within history, like a faint heartbeat in the background of recorded events. The scrolls were stored away in dusty libraries, their contents a gentle reminder of human simplicity mixed with longing for influence. Cleopatra's influence on beauty and power persisted silently, embedded within those fragile pages, while her face patiently stayed hidden in the shadows of her legend. Perhaps her true mastery was never in the rituals themselves, but in the quiet assertion that even ordinary acts could shape reputation and memory. The hum of everyday life in her court continued, unmoved by the grandiose stories, as her legacy became less about spectacle and more about small human persistence. And so her story lingered, softly woven into the fabric of time's slow, unassuming passage. Today, one can imagine her resting in a tranquil chamber, the faint rustle of papyrus wrapping her past in fragile silence. Her formulas and stories drift through history like a whisper, untouched by the modern rush, hinting at the quiet, unglamorous side of a queen's life, an ordinary woman whose routines became legend. There is a gentle humor in the notion that what mattered most to her could be so mundane, yet so meaningful, as if beauty itself was just another small act of daily resilience. Her face, blurred and unseen by the light, remains an elusive symbol, a reminder that even the most powerful can find peace in simple routines. Her legacy, softly preserved in dusty scrolls and stories, endures as a testament to a quiet human truth that simple acts performed with care can become timeless. After Alexander, the Great's empire dissolved into silent, unmarked shadows. Ptolemy, I found himself on a quiet, dust-laden map of Egypt, where the Nile's gentle pulse seemed to reassure him that history's fleeting ambitions remained rooted in the soft, familiar ground. With a slow, deliberate patience, he secured Cairo's lightly bustling edges and gently assembled the pieces of a fragile new kingdom, careful not to disturb the quiet waters too much. His promise was simple: stability, a calm hand on the wheel, and the hope that order might bloom amid the remnants of conquest. The early days drifted by like a peaceful breeze, and even as rivals stirred in the distance, Ptolemy's focus remained on the hushed daily routines, an officer sharpening his sword, a trader counting quiet coins, small acts that built the foundation. It was all a quiet contest of persistence, quietly reaffirming that power often begins with gentle touches rather than grand gestures, as if history itself were a little tired and mildly bemused by human persistence. Yet, beneath the surface of this calm, tension oozed out like slow, sticky honey. Rivals among the Diadochi kept their eyes on the faint flicker of Ptolemy's rising influence, their whispered negotiations slipping through shadowed corridors and over silent courtyards. Ptolemy played his cards with a thoughtful, measured pace, aware that abrupt moves might unravel the fragile veneer of peace. His court infused the air with a faint sense of expectancy, like the hum of a distant conversation that everyone pretended not to overhear. Maneuvering through alliances that seemed as delicate as spun silk, he maintained a veneer of casual indifference like the passing breeze, while quietly securing scribes, soldiers, and treaties. The irony was subtle. Power's first true test was not in grand displays, but in the quiet art of patience, as if the game was played in the rustling of paper rather than shouts or banners. In the slow unfolding of diplomatic chess, Ptolemy's rivals occasionally lampooned their own plans, their faces just shadows behind flickering lamps, revealing nothing but their blurred, unseen expressions of faint anticipation and mild annoyance. They sent envoys and scribes, each bearing thinly veiled ambitions wrapped in casual conversations, as if discussing the weather or the Nile's flow. Ptolemy responded with a calm that bordered on irony, acknowledging with a soft smile that history was often written in quiet, unnoticed moments, not in the thunder of battles, but in the whisper of ink and the gentle nod of an agreement. Each move was measured, as if the true battleground was the patience shared over coffee in dim, low-ceilinged chambers, where the human comedy played out in unspoken gestures. Meanwhile, the blurred images of prophets and seers, their faces hidden behind veils of light and shadow, seemed to watch quietly in the background, a distant reminder of unseen forces gently tugging at human pursuits. Over time, a gentle stillness settled like dust on old scrolls, as Ptolemy's political groundwork grew more layered and subtle, like a slow, quiet fabric woven from small, deliberate stitches. Egypt's streets, markets, and quiet palaces hummed with daily life, people resting in the shade, merchants exchanging hushed goods, officials reviewing papers without haste. The unseen tension persisted, but it was no longer sharp. It had become a soft hum, like the background noise of a familiar, well-worn path. Ptolemy sat at the core of this calm, contemplating his modest successes, aware that his true power was quietly stitched into the fabric of everyday existence. Even the faint, blurred faces of prophets seemed to soften in the dim light, as if subtly approving this slow, human rhythm of persistence, reminding him that history's real stories often unfold in the whispering in-between moments. Now, looking back with the slow, patient eye of history, one might see these early days as little more than the unremarkable groundwork of a dynasty, an eternity of quiet negotiations, small alliances, and everyday routines. Ptolemy's empire was built not with dramatic declarations, but in the soft, enduring acts of patience and subtlety, like seeds gently planted and carefully tended. The ruins of conflicts and quick victories were replaced by the gentle, almost lazy rhythm of rule, each gesture a quiet reminder that even great empires begin in gentle silence. The faces of unseen prophets faded further into the shadows, their messages lost in the passage of time. As Egypt settled into its slow, unremarkable sleep, fitting, in a way, for a story that had been quietly and carefully begun. The Ptolemaic court was a place where alliances were forged over cups of wine and exchanged glances, often disguised as political strategy, but sometimes bordering on the mundane. Ptolemy II, amidst the flicker of lamps and the murmurs of courtiers, believed that uniting family through marriage could cement loyalty and bring stability to a diffuse empire. The idea of marrying siblings seemed natural enough. One family, one future. And so, the palace's halls echoed with whispered promises and tentative smiles. It felt like just another social custom, slowly cemented into political necessity, as if history was merely passing time in a long, quiet pause. As time progressed, the marriage alliances began to carry layers of tension beneath their quiet surface. Ptolemy VIII, newly wed to Cleopatra III, found himself participating in ceremonies that felt both strategic and oddly intimate, as if the family's bonds could somehow hold back the chaos outside their walls. Court factions shifted silently like shadows, each vying for influence, whispering behind folded hands and half-open doors. The irony lingered. These unions, meant to secure loyalty, sometimes created quiet friction or concealed rivalries. Still, they persisted, a subtle dance of human imperfection paired with political design. As if the bed became a small battleground in an endless game of quiet power, the court's focus on marriage as a tool of diplomacy sometimes seemed almost absurd, like a carefully choreographed comedy of errors. Cleopatra's face, often seen in portraits as a serene mask, was obscured in many stories, her true thoughts hidden behind a veil of light or shadow. The so-called sacred union between siblings gradually revealed its strange, humorous side. Love and rivalry intertwined under the same roof, quietly conflicting over influence, while the rest of the world carried on distractedly. The courtiers, half bored or quietly amused, waited for the next move in this slow game of familial chess, knowing full well that loyalty was as fragile as a well-worn cloth. Even in their quiet virtue, there was a touch of human absurdity that lingered in every handshake and shared meal. Eventually, the palace settled into a slow rhythm. The grand scheme of marriages softened into a series of familiar gestures, greetings at dawn, shared bread, tentative alliances. The faces behind veils, once blurred in the heat of political ambition, now seemed more tired than aggressive. The power plays, while still present, drifted into a quiet background hum, like the distant sound of a breeze through papyrus. The familial bonds, flawed but resilient, carried the weight of history, sometimes uncomfortably, sometimes with a faint streak of humor. There was a kind of calm in knowing these threads of human weakness bound them more tightly than any decree could, as if all of it was just a long, slow passing of time, without rush, without finality. Looking back, one might see the Ptolemaic family as an ongoing experiment in trying to hold a fragile empire together through the gentle, often awkward, bonds of kinship. Their marriages, laced with quiet irony, reflected a stubborn hope that blood alone could forge loyalty and stability. The court's factions moved in their own slow rhythm, ever quietly, ever subtly, much like the swaying light at dusk. Somewhere in the background, unseen faces of prophets or advisors remained hidden behind a diffuse glow of light, forgotten, their faces blurred, their voices lost in the hush of history. Perhaps all these human moments, clumsy, earnest, flawed, are what stubbornly tethered court and empire through centuries of slow, unremarkable time, until it was time to change again. In the waning light of the Hellenistic period, Cleopatra VII's rise to power seemed almost routine in its quiet persistence. Amid the flickering shadows of palace courtyards and quiet conversations behind heavy wooden doors, she quietly forged her claim, the soft scrape of papyrus and the gentle clink of coins her constant companions. Her ascension was neither dramatic nor loud. It was a slow, deliberate move, like an insistent breeze stirring the dust on old stone steps, marking the slow passage of a woman who knew the weight of history resting lightly on her shoulders. As her reign settled into its early days, tensions simmered beneath the calm surface, rival factions and foreign interests quietly vying for advantage. Egypt's once unshakable sovereignty now fluttered like a curtain caught in a faint breeze, showing signs of wavering. Cleopatra, with her calm but watchful gaze, watched the subtle shifts, the distant footsteps of Roman ambassadors, the faint rustle of courtiers' robes, as she maneuvered through a delicate dance of diplomacy, her voice soft but firm, her gestures careful and deliberate. It was a game of shadows, where every word mattered, and silence was as powerful as speech. Irony lingered in moments when alliances formed and broke with ease, often over simple misunderstandings or moments of fatigue. Cleopatra's reliance on her charm and quick wit sometimes contrasted with the heavy, inevitable presence of Roman ambitions, Julius Caesar's shadow looming over Alexandria, his face blurred, but his influence undeniable, as they met in the dynamic yet mundane act of political exchange. The exchange of gifts, words, or merely unspoken promises. The grand spectacle masked a quiet spectacle of human frailty. Reality, after all, was often just a matter of who could wait patiently longer, who could resist the urge to reveal their true intentions. Over time, Cleopatra's alliances with Rome grew into a calm, maternal rhythm, an uneasy peace that carried her through the turbulent waves of external interference and internal strife. Mark Antony's arrival brought new complexities, yet she responded with thoughtful restraint, her face often half-shadowed, her emotions hidden behind a veil of calm. She understood the humbling truth. This was a constant negotiation of power, a slow dance with the unpredictable flow of history. The palace walls, cool and carrying the faint scent of incense, bore witness to her quietly purposeful existence amidst the chaos, her steps measured, and her mind attuned to the subtle shift of currents. Looking back, Cleopatra's story feels like a prolonged sigh, an acknowledgement of human persistence amid the unchanging passage of time. Her throne, fragile and fought over, ultimately rested on her ability to hold both her homeland and her reputation in a delicate balance. Few truly saw her full face, the blurred, shadowed hem of her persona, yet her presence lingered like a light in a quiet room, soft and unassuming. In the end, her legacy appears not in grandeur, but in the slow, steady persistence of someone trying to remain herself in a world that often refused to sit still for long. The quiet strength she embodied turns quietly, endlessly, into a gentle, almost invisible ripple across history. In the softly lit halls of Alexandria, beneath banners draped lazily over wooden beams, the Ptolemaic court yielded to the quiet routines of daily life. Cleopatra's advisors, with faces blurred by the glow of oil lamps, murmured over scrolls and scroll-like plans, each decision carried on the faint rustle of papyrus. Outside, in the gentle warmth of evening, the city's narrow streets moved slowly, as if even time preferred a measured pace. It was a period when power was less a roaring storm and more a slow erosion, an endless series of small human gestures that built or eroded empires, quietly and without fanfare. As tensions crept into the air like a faint, sour smell, the political landscape shifted. Antony's legions, dressed in armor that caught the sunlight with unwitting irony, crossed paths with Octavian's forces near the outskirts of the city. Orders drifted through campfires and the calling of sleepy sentries. The naval forces, heavy and slow-moving, prepared for what seemed like another routine standoff. Yet underneath, there was a subtle tremor of anticipation that neither side quite managed to suppress. The silences between commands grew longer, almost deliberate, as if the crews sensed something inevitable but couldn't quite describe it. Then came the cautious hurry of strategy and the strange irony of fame. Cleopatra, her face obscured beneath an uncertain light, made her boldest move yet, betting everything on the coming day at Actium. Her navy, a patchwork of aging ships and hesitant sailors, awaited the showdown with a strange humor. What had begun as a great empire's ambition now felt like an awkward dance on a small, wavering stage. The waves lapped silently against hulls, and the distant sounds of marching armies seemed almost like background noise to a quiet, resigned procession of human folly. The scenes played out like a slow-motion tableau, grand gestures, shadowed by a weary sense of something just beyond reach. When the final clash at Actium came, it was a slow, muted affair, not a clash of thunder, but a gentle, relentless push that exhausted the air of victory and defeat alike. Ships tangled in muddled chaos, their sails flapping like tired wings, as sailors moved with the faint hum of routine, oblivious to the historic weight of their actions. Cleopatra and Antony watched from the sidelines, faces partly hidden by the low sun, as the tide swung in favor of Octavian. The victory was won not with dramatic shouts, but with the slow settling of tired ships and the quiet, unremarkable murmur of a chapter closing. The moment was strangely anticlimactic, a reminder that even the grandest power struggles can end in soft, subdued fading. In the aftermath, Alexandria's streets grew quiet once again, as if the city itself was sighing in relief or perhaps exhaustion. Cleopatra's face remained unseen, shadows cocooning her in the legend that had become her story, a story of a gamble, a fall, and inevitable decline. The empire, once vibrant with ambition, now seemed to settle into its slow, inevitable drift, like a tired traveler lowering his head against the weight of history. Reflecting on it, one might see that even great power is just a collection of small moments, a glance, a decision, a gentle wave. And so, like everything else, it quietly slipped into the annals of time, leaving behind only the faintest trace of what once was. In the quiet shadows of history, the Ptolemaic dynasty lingered like a gentle murmur. Its power, rooted in a land that had long shifted from empire to fixture on the Nile. Cleopatra's rule emerged amidst the ancient sands, her presence both commanding and ephemeral, like a flickering candle in a vast, dim chamber. As she navigated the delicate dance of alliance and independence, her story unfolded in the routine gestures, an exchanged coin, a whispered treaty, the subtle movement of scrolls on a wooden desk, each small act weighted with the quiet gravity of dynastic hopes. Yet beneath the surface, forces gathered quietly, whispering change through the corridors of power, like the distant hum of a turning wheel. The story seemed to flicker in the soft glow of dawn, slowly awakening to face the inevitable tide beyond its grasp. Tension seeped into this twilight of autonomy as the Roman Empire stretched its shadow further across the Mediterranean. Indifferent to the delicate courtyards of Alexandria, Cleopatra's suicide, like a final, understated sigh, marked the end of an era, her life. A fragile web woven with human flaws and royal ambitions, dissolved in a moment of quiet despair. The Roman legions, heavy with the sound of distant marching, entered Egypt in a procession that felt almost routine. Yet, beneath their disciplined march, a subtle irony lingered. The once formidable Ptolemaic realm was now a quiet annexation, with no grand struggle, only the soft rustling of history folding into new chapters. The streets, once bustling with imperial procession, settled into the slow, mundane rhythm of changed dust settling on relics, scrolls untouched, faces blurred by shadows of the past. The shift was barely perceptible, like the passing of a soft breeze that leaves no trace, yet forever alters the landscape. As the dust of conquest settled, the irony of the Ptolemaic legacy became apparent in the quiet corridors of influence. The dynasty's blend of Greek and Egyptian culture persisted, embedded in art, language, and architecture, bodies and stories that resisted the slow fade of political power. In museums and quiet study rooms, scholars traced faint lines connecting ancient governance to later Mediterranean traditions, recognizing in their cautious reforms and courtly rituals echoes of royal subtlety. Prophets, whose faces remained hidden behind veiled shadows or lost in ancient light, continued to inspire or comfort in unexpected ways, their essence preserved not by belief, but by the silent reverence of those who remembered. The city's streets, quiet now, still hummed with the faint resonance of foreign kings and vanished queens, a slow, unspoken testament to the endurance of human craft and memory amid the weariness of centuries. In the calm aftermath, history seemed to exhale softly, as if resigned to the eternal ebb and flow of power and memory. The grandeur of Ptolemaic courts was replaced by the gentle hum of everyday life, vendors bargaining softly under awnings, scribes copying manuscripts in dim candlelight, all unfolding in a steady rhythm that seemed almost unremarkable. The old symbols and stories persisted, like quiet echoes of a distant voice, faint yet recognizable, comforting in their familiarity. It was as if history, exhausted from its own drama, had aged into a gentle routine where the ceaseless pursuit of dominance was replaced by quiet remembrance and adaptation. The faces of their rulers, obscured by shadows or blurred by time, remained unimportant in the grand tapestry, mere silhouettes in the slow, steady flow of human continuity. What remained was not grandeur, but a persistence of small acts woven into the fabric of daily life. Now, in the quiet reflection of ages past, the Ptolemaic story appears less as a tale of conflict and glory, and more as a reminder of human imperfection and enduring subtlety. Their cultural mosaic, stitched into the fabric of Mediterranean history, silently influenced the governance and literary traditions that followed, whispering softly through the generations. Cleopatra's shadow, uncertain and fleeting, lingers not as a queen's final act, but as a symbol of the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. The silent faces of prophets, the muted artifacts, and the gentle decay of ancient walls suggest that even in decline, there is a kind of peaceful endurance, an acceptance that history moves slowly, barely noticeable except in the faintest shifts. As this story settles into the quiet corners of memory, we realize that the true legacy of the Ptolemaic realm was never just about dominance, but about the quiet persistence of human stories, woven into the calm fabric of time. In the subdued glow of Alexandria's marble courtyards, Cleopatra VII existed in a world where history's stories often began with quiet mercy. Her gaze lingered on the sea beyond the Nile, the faint hum of court conversations drifting through the warm air like a persistent whisper. As Roman forces encroached steadily, the once vibrant empire seemed to unwind like a delicate thread, fragile and fading. Still, her daily routines, some hand-folded papyrus, a sip of cool wine, kept her grounded amid the slow, unfolding chaos. The prophecy of a serpent's bite, ancient and vague, lingered in the back of her mind, an old echo meeting the present with mild, patient irony. As the walls of Alexandria drew closer to silence, tension crept covertly into the once-terminal optimism of her court. Rumors, like faint shadows, slipped through the stone corridors with the breeze. Some spoke of treachery, others of destiny's cruel whim. Her advisers, their faces flickering with uncertain light, debated softly over strategies and fateful omens, their voices a gentle hum that contrasted the heavy weight of impending loss. Cleopatra's relaxed posture betrayed no fear, only the slow recognition that events, like sands in an hourglass, could not be halted. Somewhere in the dimming dusk, the prophecy's whisper seemed to grow louder, an unhurried reminder of death's silent approach, wrapped in the ordinary sounds of daily life. Then, amid the quiet irony of unfolding history, some scholars have mused about the curious notion that Cleopatra's death might have been a staged act of self-destruction or faint mysticism. Perhaps the serpent was not real, but a symbol, a final act dressed in subtle deceit, or merely a myth passed down to soften the harsh reality of ending. Yet, the more mundane details, her servants' steady hands, the faint scent of incense, the soft patter of her gown, remained unchanged, unexaggerated by legend. The palace, now calm in its decline, had become a place where the ordinary was tinged with silent bitterness, and even the most tragic moments felt tranquil in their quiet inevitability. In these small human details, history whispered a gentle joke at its own grand, foolish seriousness. With the approach of night, Cleopatra's figure seemed almost indistinct in the shadows of her fading empire, her presence a quiet final chapter. The stories that would later fill history books about her death, whether by venomous bite or by her own hand, retained a distant, subdued tone, like a fading photograph. She rested in her chamber, her face blurred by the soft light, as if the stories of her face and choices had blurred into something less certain, more human, imperfect, and unresolved. The palace's quiet hum persisted like a lullaby, a reminder that even for rulers, life's last moments often drift by in a calm, almost mundane manner. The mystery, still lingering, seemed to breathe softly in the shadows, a soft, unspoken question about fate and fiction. Ultimately, Cleopatra's death, whether by serpent's whisper or silent surrender, remains a quiet testament to the slow, inevitable passage of history that age never rushes. Her story, wrapped in gentle irony, continues to evoke a sense of peaceful resignation, an acknowledgement that even in moments of profound change, life's simplest acts persist. The old prophecy, now a faint echo, reminds us that human tales are woven from small, uncertain threads, often tangled in the mundane. As we reflect on her fading image, the story feels less like a tragedy and more like a gentle, sleepy nod to the endless, quiet rhythm of human imperfection, an ordinary ending to an extraordinary life, softly remembered. In the quiet hours before dawn, the chambers of Cleopatra seem still, as if time itself hesitated to disturb her last moments. The air is thick with a faint scent of olives and faint hope, while the outlines of her palace softly blur in the early light. Courtiers lingered near the doorway, their faces blurred by the dim glow, each uncertain whether the story would be right or merely a rumor. Some whispered that she had chosen on her own, a final act of dignity, with the faintest smile curling at the edges of her memory. Yet beneath the calm surface, an awkward curiosity persisted. How exactly did her last, silent gesture come to be so carefully mythologized? It was a story that refused to sit still, even in the quietest of moments. As the days unfolded, the whispers grew louder, swirling with shadows of suspicion and debate. Was it truly a venomous asp that ended her life, its bite so deliberate and precise, or the result of some clandestine plan? A few courtly figures with restless eyes debated in hushed circles about the plausibility of her self-inflicted fate, their voices barely more than a whisper over a tray of late-night wine. Secret agents, cloaked in the shadows behind silken curtains, seemed to move with purpose, their unseen hands tightening the web of silence around her death. The idea of a simple, peaceful surrender felt increasingly distant, replaced by darker notions of conspiracy and concealment that lingered like half-remembered dreams. The irony was gentle, but persistent. How a story so quietly tragic had become a symbol of both victory and fall. The narrative taken for truth was boiled down to that single, poetic image: Cleopatra, regal yet resigned, offering her wrist to the waiting asp. Meanwhile, a skeptical observer chuckled softly at the almost theatrical precision of the myth, imagining courtiers nervously checking the timeline, each convinced that the story was painted just a little too perfectly. The asp itself, an ordinary snake, sat somewhere in silent stagnation, its role inflated by the weight of human storytelling. It was as if history, in its slow and deliberate way, found a kind of dark humor in how an everyday creature became Rome's final, silent witness. In quieter moments, the stories settled into a calm like dusk settling over a sand-dusted city. Perhaps Cleopatra, her features blurred by the haze of memory, simply waited in her chamber, lost in thoughts about her empire, her life, or her own quiet acceptance. The details of her death became less urgent, more like a faint trace, an echo of a life, intertwined with legends that refused to fade completely. The courtiers, now resigned, resumed their routines, serving, watching, whispering, each aware that the truth was perhaps forever shrouded in shadow and subtle humor. The unspoken understanding was that some stories linger, not because they are true, but because they comfort in their quiet, unresolvable mystery. And so, as the centuries pass, the question remains softly unresolved. What really happened that night? Whether Cleopatra's death was a self-chosen act sculpted by her own will, or a story carefully crafted by those who came after, it carries a quiet beauty in its ambiguity. Her face, always quietly blurred in the histories, remains an unseen shade behind layers of light and shadow, much like the unknown truths that continue to drift silently through time. Perhaps, in the end, the story is less about the death itself than about the human desire to craft meaning from the mundane, tragedy or irony, legend or bitterness, all softly woven into the fabric of history's slow, measured sleep. In the quiet moments of the late afternoon, Cleopatra rested in her chamber, the faint scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the air. The queen's servants prepared her customary wine, a simple yet cherished daily ritual that carried the weight of tradition and personal comfort. As she reached for the cup, her hand trembled momentarily, a small, unremarkable motion that might have gone unnoticed had anyone been watching intently. The atmosphere was calm, filled with the subtle hum of distant conversations and the soft flicker of oil lamps. Yet beneath this veneer of serenity, a question quietly began to emerge. Was her death truly an act of fate, or something more insidious lurking in the shadows? The story of the poisoned cup was just beginning to unfurl beneath the stillness of that ordinary day. As days passed, whispers of suspicion simmered quietly within court walls. Assassination theories, secret encounters, and hidden motives layered themselves like dust on ancient shelves. Rumors grew that a Roman envoy, perhaps feeling slighted or betrayed, might have slipped a concealed vial into Cleopatra's wine. A clandestine act cloaked in the chaos of political intrigue. Investigators, some reluctantly, began to scrutinize the small details. A misplaced ingredient, a shadow in the hallway, a forgotten alchemist's recipe. The idea that poison could be easily disguised in everyday objects added an ironic touch to the conspiracy. Ordinary things, mundane rituals, now mapped to deadly plots. The more they looked, the more the line blurred between personal tragedy and political game, revealing the intricate, often absurd, chess match unfolding behind palace walls. Skeptics and scholars alike chuckled quietly at the notion that a Roman envoy had managed such a deft, almost theatrical act of sabotage, like slipping a dream into someone's wine. Yet, curiosity persisted. Old scrolls and fragmented texts hinted at hidden alchemists, masters of subtlety who could craft poisons indistinguishable from harmless ingredients. These secretive figures, often living in the margins of court life, seemed to embody the very paradox of poison, at once mundane and deadly, overlooked and omnipotent. Stories of whispered experiments in basements and clandestine alchemy labs floated through the air like the last leaves of autumn, suggesting that Cleopatra's death might have been less an end and more a complex, slow game of poison and concealment. Somewhere in that quiet chaos, irony laced every claim, victim and perpetrator, innocent and guilty, all tangled in the delicate fabric of political survival. Eventually, the truth settled into a kind of calm, like the gentle roll of waves on a quiet shore. As scholars pondered whether such a layered narrative was just another human story, full of uncertainties rather than certainties, the light through the temple's thin windows cast soft shadows on the stone floor as the court moved on, seemingly indifferent to the specifics of Cleopatra's demise. The human puzzle remained. Did she die by her own hand, perhaps knowing or fearing too much? Or was she quietly undone by others lurking behind the scenes? Regardless of the answer, her death became a symbol, an amalgam of political power, fragile human fragility, and the quiet humor found in human attempts to master their own mysteries. The error and irony softened into a contemplative silence, echoing the slow drift of an unresolved story. Now, in the stillness of history's waiting room, the story of Cleopatra's mysterious end feels like a shared, sleepy whisper, an ancient human curiosity wrapped in mundane routine. The quiet suspicion about the poisoned cup reminds us that even moments of great finality are woven from ordinary threads. A hand reaching, a cup lifted, a breath held just a second longer. Her face, hidden behind the shadows of legend, blurs into the collective memory, faint, elusive, yet persistently present. Perhaps, in the end, the slow game of poison was always more about human fears and the quiet comedy of power than any sharp, pointed act. And so the story rests, peacefully uncertain, as all stories do, drifting softly into the night. Beneath the grandiosity of Cleopatra's palace, a hidden chamber lingered in quiet obscurity, an unassuming space where the air was thick with dust and the faint scent of old stone. Scholars, long intrigued by her mysterious end, discovered the entrance during a careful excavation, their lanterns casting diffuse glow on carved symbols that seemed to sway between order and chaos. Inside, a sealed jar sat alone on a simple wooden shelf, its surface etched with weathered patterns. Beneath it, strange marks suggested something more than just storage, a clue, perhaps, to her final moments. It felt like an ordinary discovery, but with each layer of dirt brushed aside, the history looked as if it hesitated, timid and uncertain, as if waiting for someone to interpret its quiet message. Cleopatra's death had always carried whispers of tragedy. Yet here, in this small, clandestine space, the story seemed to tiptoe between the mundane and the mysterious, inviting no haste in understanding it all. As researchers examined the cryptic symbols and the sealed jar, the weight of uncertainty grew, their fingers tracing cold carvings that might tell a different story about her demise. Was this chamber meant to conceal truth, or simply to protect an ordinary object from time's trivial pursuit? Theories came and went: poison, betrayal, suicide. But now, a new possibility took shape. Perhaps unseen conspirators had orchestrated her end, leaving behind a puzzle only the patient could solve. Tensions arose quietly among the scholars as they debated whether the cryptic language pointed to a conspiracy or merely idle scribbles of forgotten artisans. The discovery felt increasingly like a quiet game of shadows and riddles, where the real conspiracy was the silence, an absence of answers that stretched out lazily, like a long, peaceful afternoon. In this slow unfolding of clues, the story's irony was clear. Even the most deliberate plots could be lost in the fog of time, their meaning slowly dissolving into the ordinary stillness of history's sleep. A sense of irony settled softly as the scholars recognized that perhaps Cleopatra's death was less a carefully planned conspiracy and more a series of small, human mistakes, an overreach of pride, a hurried choice, a fragile moment of vulnerability. The symbols on the wall, once thought menacing, now seemed almost mundane, like doodles made in a moment of idle thought. The jar, sealed tight, was nothing more sinister than a common vessel cherished for its simple purpose. The investigators chuckled quietly beneath their weary brows. How often history's biggest stories rest on the thinnest details, easily misinterpreted or overlooked in the quiet of everyday life. For a brief, tranquil pause, the narrative relaxed, revealing that human stories, much like their loved ones, often end not with grand revelations, but with gentle, unassuming endings, forgettable in their ordinariness, yet profoundly human. In the peaceful silence that followed, the tales of secret chambers and hidden poisons seemed to drift away like whispers into the evening air, leaving only the gentle hum of ongoing scholarship. The chamber's cryptic symbols faded into a backdrop of history's slow, steady hum, an echo of mysteries that may never be fully unraveled, but that perhaps do not need to be. The discovery, quiet and unremarkable in its everydayness, reminded everyone that history often chooses patience over passion, and that truth often emerges in the unlikeliest of quiet places, the blurriness of sacred figures' faces, the gentle flicker of interpretations. These became symbols of the human tendency to see what we wish in shadows and stories. As the scholars closed their notebooks and the chamber grew silent once more, there was a subtle acknowledgement. Sometimes the story's greatest gift is its slow, innocent ambiguity, allowing us to rest and ponder what little is known. In the end, Cleopatra's mysterious death became, perhaps, just another quiet story etched into the vast fabric of history, an episode that invites us to accept human imperfection and the subtle irony that sometimes the most profound secrets are nothing more than faint traces left behind in dusty chambers. We sit quietly with these stories, savoring their gentle stillness, understanding that what remains unspoken is often the most telling of all. The chamber, the symbols, the sealed jar, everything now feels like a mirror of our own patience and limited grasp. And in this calm reflection, history's tired voice offers a soft smile. Her story, wrapped in quiet irony, reminds us that some mysteries are better left in the gentle hush of time, remaining forever as peaceful, unresolvable whispers beneath the surface of human memory. In the faint glow of history's dimming light, Cleopatra's death begins as a quiet question lingering in the dusty corners of ancient records. Surviving fragments tell of a queen famed for her wit and allure, sprawled in a bewildering moment that has haunted scholars for centuries. Her figure, often blurred at the edges by time, rests on delicate notions of whether it was fate or design that sealed her final breath. The silent shores of Alexandria seem to hold their breath as the story drifts softly like a shadow passing over calm waters. It's almost comforting in its ambiguity. This slow fade of a ruler's life, leaving behind whispers rather than answers, just as the night softly swallows the last of a day's noise. As the years unfurled further, the tension in the tale thickens with the presence of the asp, that small, silent snake slithering into the realm of possible culprits. Its quiet, deadly bite is a symbol that cloaks the death in a subtle menace, as if nature itself had played a part in her end. But skeptics point out that poison might have been more accessible in the shadows of palace intrigue, or even a covert hand hidden behind velvet curtains. The room where Cleopatra expired remains, untouched in the mind's eye, filled with the gentle hum of unspoken accusations and possibilities. The irony is that such a tiny creature, easy to overlook, could wield such finality. whispering softly that death often arrives in the humblest of forms. Yet in the slow, deliberate silence of ongoing debate, some observe that perhaps the poison was a more human thing, crafted carefully in secret. A small vial cloaked in mundane objects on a dusty shelf. The idea persists that her death, so meticulously understated, might reflect the cautious, ironic nature of power itself. People reach for subtle poisons as they do for everyday cups of wine. The contrast is quietly amusing, a queen's end wrapped in ordinary domesticity, as if death were just another routine act. The stories, with their blurred faces of prophets and shadows of conspirators, seem to smile at their own frayed narratives. We are left with a faint, ironic sense that history's great mysteries are often just the whispers of overlooked details. Eventually, as the dust settles slowly on these competing theories, the focus shifts inward to the enduring image of Cleopatra, a figure both regal and fragile, cloaked in a delicate aura of enigma. Her legacy, like a calm reflection on still water, remains unchanged by the specifics of her demise, embodying the quiet uncertainty that we carry in all stories of power and mortality. The old halls of Alexandria echo with familiarity, textured by the soft hum of human imperfection and the gentle passing of time. Her face, blurred once more by the gentle light, reminds us that even the most intriguing mysteries are ultimately human stories, full of small missteps, subtle ironies, and profound quiet. What remains is simply this: a reflection on the fleeting nature of life itself, touched by the faint glow of eternity. In the end, Cleopatra's death endures as a mirror of human curiosity and the quiet dance of truth and doubt. The question of whether the asp or the poison claimed her life is perhaps less important than the way her story softly continues to mirror our own uncertainties, our fragile grasp on what is known. Her legacy, woven through the centuries like a gentle thread, reminds us that the past's most profound puzzles are often just snapshots of everyday human effort, imperfect, understated, and quietly, endlessly intriguing. As we sleep beneath the slow, watching stars, the echoes of her mysterious end whisper softly, inviting us to ponder the subtle complexities of history, forever just beyond our reach, yet somehow familiar in their quiet, human hum.